I never thought a quiet Sunday afternoon would turn into something that would shake my entire family and leave our neighbors speechless. It started with a simple disagreement with our HOA, the kind of thing that should have been settled with a conversation. Instead, we got a patrol car, flashing lights, and a man with a badge who seemed more interested in showing power than keeping peace. We had just finished lunch. My kids were playing on the front lawn. My wife was watering her flowers, and I was checking the mailbox. That's when the HOA security vehicle pulled up. The officer, let's call him Cop Dan, stepped out and told me there was a violation. I calmly asked what it was. His answer didn't make sense. Something about an unauthorized structure, but I knew that wasn't true. We had already handled this legally weeks ago. I even had the court order to prove it. But before I could explain, things escalated. He raised his voice, and when I refused to back down, he pulled out a taser. In front of my children, my wife screamed, and just like that, Ty was on the ground, shocked, humiliated. My kids were crying. My neighbors stood frozen, unsure what they were witnessing. And then I heard it. The silence. The kind of silence that drops when someone realizes they just made a terrible mistake. He looked down at the paperwork my wife shoved into his hands. His face changed. He read the first few lines of the court order and froze. That's when everything shifted, but the damage was already done. And what happened next? You won't believe how fast the narrative turned and who tried to cover it up. Let me take you inside the moment it all unraveled. The look on his face said everything. As he stared at the court order, his hands began to shake, just slightly, not from fear, but from realization. He had acted too fast, too rough, and now he knew it. But even with the truth right there in his hands, he didn't say a word. Number? Apology? No explanation. Just silence. My wife stood in front of him, shielding our kids, demanding answers he didn't seem ready to give. You're probably wondering what led up to all this. It wasn't overnight. The tension with our HOA had been building for months. All over a small shed we built in the backyard, a shed we got approved by the city, paid for permits, even showed plans to the HOA. But someone on the board had a problem with us. I don't know if it was personal, political, or something else. But they kept sending warnings, fines, and threats. Even after the court sided with us, we thought the court order would settle it. We thought that once a judge ruled in our favor, that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. The HOA started using their private security more aggressively. People we'd never seen before started driving slowly past our house. Sometimes they'd stop, take pictures, then leave. It was subtle, but it didn't feel random. We knew something was coming. We just didn't know it would come like this. What bothered me most wasn't just the taser or the embarrassment. It was the fact that someone had sent this officer knowing the court order existed. And that raised a whole new question. Was this a mistake, or was it planned? The deeper I looked, the more disturbing things I started to uncover, and that's when the story took a darker turn. After that day, everything changed. Word spread fast around the neighborhood. Some people acted concerned. Others avoided eye contact altogether. It was like everyone knew something but didn't want to be the one to say it out loud. We were suddenly the center of attention, but not in a good way. The HOA went completely silent. No follow-up, no explanation, not even a basic welfare check. After the incident, I knew better than to think they were done. I started digging. I requested copies of every violation they'd ever filed against us. What I found was disturbing patterns, inconsistencies, and documents that had been edited or backdated. Some reports had names I didn't recognize. One officer, who'd supposedly visited our property twice, turned out to have moved out of state a year ago, and the cop who tased me, his name wasn't listed on any official HOA payroll. That raised even more red flags. Meanwhile, my kids were afraid to play outside. My wife started documenting everything: times, dates, photos, videos, just in case. We weren't paranoid, we were being careful. Because something was off, and it felt like we were being watched. Even at night, we'd notice unfamiliar cars parked down the street, engines running, lights off. One neighbor said we were pushing too hard. Another warned us to drop it before it gets worse. Then came the anonymous letter. No return. Address, just one line typed in bold. Asterisk, you were never supposed to see that order. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about a shed or a violation. This was about power, control, and someone trying to erase a mistake they couldn't afford to admit. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized this fight was far from over. It was just beginning. I didn't sleep much after that letter arrived. Every sound outside felt louder. Every knock at the door made my heart jump. I wasn't scared for myself, I was scared for my family. Something about all this felt bigger than just a feud with the HOA. There were people involved who weren't supposed to be. And every time I peeled back a layer, the situation got murkier. I decided to meet with a local reporter, someone who'd covered HOA abuses before. I brought her everything: the court order, photos, videos, timestamps, even the letter. She listened closely, nodding as she jotted down notes. When I showed her the footage from the day I was tased, her eyes widened. "They're going to come after you for this," she said quietly. "Are you sure you want to keep going?" I didn't even hesitate. I can't back down now. Meanwhile, the HOA scheduled a closed-door emergency board meeting. Residents weren't allowed to attend, no minutes were published, and nobody on the board would speak about what was discussed. But that night, my security camera picked up a figure in a hoodie walking up to my driveway and slipping something under the windshield of my truck. It was another letter, shorter this time. Asterisk, you should have let it go. Asterisk, the next morning. I got a call from the reporter. She sounded shaken. "The man who tased you is not just a cop. He's tied to a private firm that's been hired by multiple HOAs for special enforcement. This goes deeper than you think." I looked at my kids sitting at the breakfast table, completely unaware of how close we were to something dangerous. And in that moment, I realized I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't walk away from, even if I wanted to. That same afternoon, just as I was still processing the reporter's call, a white SUV pulled up across the street. No plates, tinted windows. It sat there for nearly an hour. I stepped outside, pretending to take out the trash, just to see if anyone inside would react. Nothing. But as soon as I turned to head back in, the engine started. It slowly rolled away. That night, the reporter texted me again, but this time, it wasn't about the case. "We need to meet," not on the phone. I found something they didn't want anyone to see. We arranged to meet at a small cafe 2 towns over. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept since our last conversation. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were emails, dozens of them, communications between the HOA board and the private enforcement firm dating back almost a year. One message caught my eye. It was sent just 2 days before I got tased. It read, asterisk, use enough force to make a statement. He's getting too bold. No names, just initials. But I recognized one of them. It belonged to the HOA president. That was the second twist. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't bad training or poor judgment. It was planned, coordinated, approved. Someone in our own neighborhood, someone we waved to every week, had given the green light for what happened to me. And it didn't stop there. The emails hinted at other families who'd been pressured into silence, some who had moved away suddenly, others who sold their homes below market value after enforcement visits. I left the cafe shaken. What started as a simple shed dispute had now turned into something much darker: organized effort to control, silence, and intimidate. And I knew then, if I didn't expose this, no one else would. I knew the emails were the breakthrough. The next morning, I compiled every piece of evidence, videos, documents, the court order, even the anonymous letters, and delivered it straight to the local news station. Within 48 hours, the story aired. HOA accused of hiring private security to intimidate residents. It spread like wildfire. The footage of me getting tased played over and over again. And the reporter I met with was invited to speak on multiple outlets. The neighborhood that had once looked away suddenly had its eyes wide open. Asterisk. The backlash hit fast. Residents started demanding a full investigation. Protest signs showed up on lawns. And then, just 3 days later, the HOA president resigned. No warning, no statement, just vanished. But the real shock came during the investigation that followed. Turns out, the private enforcement firm had already been under quiet federal scrutiny for overstepping boundaries in other neighborhoods across the state. My case pushed everything into the spotlight. Arrests were made. Board members were subpoenaed. The officer who tased me, he wasn't just acting on orders, he was operating without a valid license, something the HOA had either missed or ignored. As we sat down for our first real dinner as a family since the ordeal began, my wife handed me a plain envelope that had come in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo, black and white, grainy, but it showed a meeting. 5 men, including our former HOA president, shaking hands with someone I didn't recognize. On the back, one sentence was scribbled in red ink. Asterisk, this goes higher than you think. Asterisk, I stared at it for a long time. The battle we fought was over, but the war, maybe, had just begun. I held that photo for days, unsure what to do with it. Part of me wanted to dive deeper, follow every thread, expose whoever was really pulling the strings, but another part of me, the tired part, the father, the husband, just wanted peace. We had been through so much already. My kids were finally laughing again. My wife had started planting flowers in the yard without looking over her shoulder. It felt like we could finally breathe. The investigation eventually uncovered more families who had been pushed out quietly. Some threatened, others bought off. Most didn't want to speak publicly, but they were relieved someone finally had. The HOA was dissolved, replaced by a resident-led committee with transparency rules and regular public meetings. People who once kept their distance now came by with food, support, or just to say they were sorry for not stepping up sooner. As for me, I never saw that white SUV again. The firm was shut down statewide, and several of its executives were brought to trial. The officer who tased me pled guilty and lost his enforcement credentials for good. The court acknowledged the emotional and physical damage. And while the settlement couldn't undo what happened, it helped us rebuild. Sometimes I still think about that last photo, the one hinting that someone bigger might have been behind it all. Maybe one day I'll follow that lead. Or maybe I won't. Maybe this story was never about revenge or conspiracy. Maybe it was about standing up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. So if you're watching this wondering if your voice matters, or if it's worth speaking out, let me tell you this, it does. Because what happened in front of my family could have happened to yours. And the moment we stop pushing back is the moment they win.